One cold night, millionaire Alexander Winston rescues a homeless girl, giving her a chance at a new life. In New York, Eliza Harris works hard to prove that she is more than just his charity, but rumors and doubts threaten to destroy everything she has built. When feelings begin to blossom between them, Eliza realizes that her fear of being dependent is stronger than her love and leaves to find her own way. But a year later, she returns ready for the first time to make a choice not with her head, but with her heart. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you don't miss new stories. London rain did not forgive the weak. Cold drops pounded the pavement, running down the roofs of buildings and collecting in puddles that no one wanted to avoid. People hurried about their business, hiding under umbrellas, wrapping themselves in expensive raincoats, hiding in warm taxis. Nobody noticed her. No one looked at the girl sitting on the wet sidewalk outside the 24-hour supermarket. Eliza Harris clutched her knees with her hands, trying to retain some warmth. Her thin body was shaking, her clothes were soaked with moisture, and her hair was stuck to her face, preventing her from looking at the world that had long since ceased to belong to her. Dozens of people walked around her, and no one stopped. She was a shadow in the city of lights, a useless detail in the luxurious backdrop of someone else's life. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten anything worthwhile. For the past 2 days, she had been surviving on the cold remains of a sandwich she found in a trash can. The money she had disappeared faster than she expected. And now I didn't even know how to live through another night. When the supermarket door opened, she looked up. A tall man in a dark coat, with a determined look and an expression of tired indifference to the world, came out of the store. Alexander Winston. The name is still unfamiliar to her, but in just a few minutes it will change her whole life. She hadn't planned to say anything, but her stomach betrayed her, loudly reminding her of its existence. She noticed the man's gaze lingering on her, but she didn't show it. She was used to it, one split second of attention, and then people moved on again. It has always been like this. But not this time. Alexander stopped. She felt her heart skip a beat. He leaned over slowly, holding a paper bag of groceries in his hand. "Are you here alone?" Her lips trembled, but not just from the cold. She didn't know what to answer. What to say to a person who, for the first time in a long time, looks at her as something other than empty space. But her body made the decision for her. The world began to rock, her head began to spin, and she felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The last thing she heard before she fell into darkness was someone's worried voice. And then, silence. Eliza woke up to a feeling of warmth. At first, she didn't understand where she was. The soft surface under my back, the warm air, the light aroma of coffee and expensive perfume, all of this felt alien and wrong. She was used to the cold, to the dampness of the street, to nights spent under a thin cardboard blanket, and not in this place where it was too comfortable, too calm. She flinched, her eyes opening sharply. And then she froze. She was surrounded by a spacious room, furnished in light colors, with wide windows and a view of the city sparkling with lights. But this was not what struck her most. And the fact that she was in bed. In a real bed. She jumped up, looking around frantically. She was wearing new clothes, a soft cotton t-shirt and light sweatpants. Someone undressed her while she was unconscious. Her heart started beating faster, and worst-case scenarios flashed through her mind. But before she could jump out of bed and rush to the door, the same man she had seen at the store entered the room. He stopped at the threshold, holding a cup of coffee in his hands. His gaze was not threatening, but was sternly appraising. "You're already up. That's good." His voice was even calm, but there was a sense of authority behind it. She didn't answer, just clutched the edge of the blanket, feeling panic rising inside her. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse and weak. "At the hotel. In the room I rented for you." He said it as if it was something ordinary. It was as if people were bringing homeless people into 5-star hotels every day. She blinked, trying to process what she had heard. "For what?" He took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "Because if I had left you there, you wouldn't have survived the night." Her breath caught. She didn't know what to say. "I gave you clothes, food, and a bed. But what happens next is up to you." He walked over to the table by the window and placed his room keycard and a wad of cash on it. "You can take the money and leave. No one will stop you." He paused. "But if you stay, I have an offer." She looked up at him, trying to figure out what kind of person he was. What does he want? Why did he even notice her? What proposal? Job? She winced. "I'm not looking for handouts." He looked at her intently. "I'm not offering you a handout. I'm offering you an opportunity." She didn't know whether to believe him or not. But she knew one thing. If she leaves now, She will find herself back on the same sidewalk, in the same rain, and no one will ever offer her a second chance. She took a deep breath. What kind of work? Her voice was firm. He smiled at the corner of his lips, showing for the first time a hint of approval. You'll find out in New York. Eliza couldn't believe this was happening to her. Just a few days ago she was living on the street, freezing in the rain, and now she was sitting in first class on a plane heading to New York. She didn't know what to expect, didn't know who to believe. But one thing was clear. Her life would never be the same again. Alexander Winston sat nearby, calmly reading documents, while she nervously tugged at the edge of the blanket. She didn't ask him why he was doing it, but the question kept spinning in her head. What kind of person just pulls a homeless girl off the street and offers her a job? You look tense. His voice made her flinch. She turned slowly towards him, trying to hide the worry in her eyes. Do I have any reason to relax? Alexander raised his eyebrows slightly, clearly amused by her caution. If I wanted to harm you, I wouldn't spend money on business class. She pressed her lips together but remained silent. When the plane landed in New York, Eliza felt a mixture of fear and excitement. She had never been here, but this city always seemed to her to be a world of strong, self-confident people. And she still felt like an outsider. They drove to the city center, where the Winston Global office was located. The high-rise building with its shining glass facade towered over the street like a symbol of power and success. Eliza looked at him, not believing that she was about to go inside. Welcome to your new place of work. She turned sharply to Alexander. You want me to work here? In this skyscraper? He nodded, holding the door open. You didn't think you'd be delivering coffee, did you? As soon as they entered, all eyes immediately turned to her. Men in formal suits, women in elegant dresses, employees who looked like models from the covers of business magazines. And she, a simple girl from the street, who until recently was struggling for a piece of bread. Mr. Winston, do you need the conference rooms for the morning? A woman approached him, holding a tablet. Alexander nodded calmly, but then turned to Eliza. Meet Amanda Lawson, my chief secretary. Amanda, this is Eliza Harris. She will be working for the company. Amanda blinked slowly, her gaze sliding over Eliza with obvious doubt. As an assistant? Alexander calmly corrected her. As an intern. Eliza felt an unpleasant feeling arise in her chest. She hadn't expected a warm welcome, but she saw something more than just surprise in Amanda's eyes. Mistrust. She immediately understood that she would have to prove her place in this world. But she was ready for it. She must be ready. When they reached the top floor, Alexander led her into his office. You'll start with simple tasks, but if you prove that you can do more, you'll get a chance to get promoted. Eliza nodded slowly, still not fully understanding how she managed to end up here. I don't want you to think that someone gave you a gift. You will choose how to use this chance. She met his gaze and something inside her trembled. She must show that this chance was worth it. But something told her that another test awaited her. And the test will not be easy. Eliza only worked at Winston Global for 3 months, but those 3 months changed her more than her entire life. She learned faster than she thought, trying to prove that she deserved this chance. She was afraid of disappointing Alexander, but most of all, she was afraid of disappointing herself. She came to the office earlier than everyone else, left later than everyone else, missed lunches, weekends, holidays. Anything to become not just the girl he saved, but someone who stands here on an equal footing. But there was one problem. Not everyone saw her that way. It all started with small comments she overheard in the office. I wonder how she got into the company. It seems she doesn't have a business background. Well, everyone knows exactly how. Look at the way Mr. Winston looks at her. She's just his new toy. She won't last long. Eliza pretended not to hear it, but the words cut into her deeper than she would have liked. She worked hard, sparing no effort, but people still saw in her only the one whom Alexander took pity on. And worst of all, she began to doubt herself. Alexander noticed her tension. One evening, when the whole office had already left, he invited her to dinner at a restaurant. She wanted to refuse, but she knew that if she said no, he would still find out the truth. At the table, he watched her silently until she couldn't take it anymore. I heard what people were saying. And it hurts me. Her voice trembled, but she controlled herself. They think that you just bought me. That I'm here not because I know how to work, but because you brought me here. Alexander slowly put down his glass of wine and looked straight into her eyes. And what do you think yourself? She froze. I don't know. I don't want to depend on you, but I'm afraid I'll never be your equal. Alexander took a deep breath and ran his hand across the table. I brought you here because I saw potential in you. Everything else is your merit. She shook her head. And people don't see it. They won't believe it. They'll think I'm your toy no matter how much I work. Then let them think. The main thing is what you think. Eliza lowered her head. She felt that the conversation did not end there. And then he said something that turned her world upside down. I love you. She looked up at him, stunned. What? I love you, Eliza. And if this is a problem, I am willing to give you time. But I don't want to lose you. Her breathing became ragged. She expected anything but this. She knew there was something more between them than just work. But she wasn't sure she was ready to accept it. She was afraid that if she stayed, she would never be herself again. She didn't sleep all night. And in the morning, I came to the office with a decision. She wrote a letter of resignation. When she walked into his office, he already knew what she was going to say. You're leaving. She nodded quietly. I need to know who I am without you. Alexander ran his hand through his hair, holding back his emotions. Does this mean you don't love me? It means that I don't want to love you as your rescue project. He didn't stop her. Because he understood that she had to go through this path herself. She left without looking back. But her heart screamed that she was leaving something important behind. She just wasn't ready to accept it yet. It's been exactly 1 year since Eliza left Winston Global. A year she spent proving to herself and the world that she could achieve something without the help of Alexander Winston. A year that made her stronger but didn't make her forget. She moved to Boston, rented a small apartment, and got a job at a financial company as a junior analyst. I worked day and night, studying markets, reports, investment strategies. She wanted to become someone important so that one day she could tell him that she had achieved everything on her own. But every night she fell asleep with the same question. What if he doesn't wait? One morning, while checking the financial news, she saw a headline that made her heart stop. Winston is celebrating his birthday at his favorite restaurant. Influential guests are expected. She knew this restaurant. She remembered that evening when they sat there together discussing her future. She wasn't ready to accept his feelings then. But now was she ready to lose him forever? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could close the tab, forget about it, and move on with her life. But instead she got up, put on her best dress, and called a taxi to the airport. When she entered the restaurant, the evening was in full swing. The room was filled with influential people, there were hushed conversations, and waiters carried expensive wines. But she saw only him. Alexander stood by the window, talking to someone, his profile standing out sharply in the soft light of the chandeliers. She wasn't sure he would be happy to see her. But she was sure of one thing, she didn't want to run anymore. She took a deep breath and took the first step. His gaze fell on her instantly. The conversation ended. The music disappeared somewhere. The world stood still. He looked at her for a long time as if he didn't believe that she was really here. She came closer, her heart pounding in her throat. You forgot one important thing. His lips trembled slightly, but his voice remained restrained. Which one? She smiled and a challenge appeared in her eyes. That I'm not just the girl you saved. I'm the one who makes decisions for myself. She paused. And I decided that I want to spend my whole life with you. The hall held its breath. She knelt down in front of him, took out a small velvet box and opened it. Alexander Winston, will you marry me? He laughed, but there was no joy in his eyes, but pure, unadulterated happiness. He lifted her from her knees, hugged her so tightly that she could barely breathe, and whispered into her hair. You are the most incredible woman I have ever known. He pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. Yes. Hell yes. At that moment, she realized that this was no longer a story about salvation. This is a story about love, about choice, and about a woman who will never again be afraid to be herself.